Hey, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. Wow, another interesting papal address from Pope Leo XIV. This one has some phrases in there that are certainly interesting, to say the least. And, different people are going to read it different ways. And so some people might be very happy with the speech. Others might be a little concerned by some of the things that are said. Either way, we're going to read it together, going to pull it up on the screen, and we're going to read the whole thing. This is an address that he just offered today. So hot off the press. Before we dive in, please hit the subscribe button and the like button if you haven't already. I'm going to share my screen so we could take a look at the papal address together and see what he's saying. All right, so this is an address of Pope Leo XIV to members of the Centesimus Annus Pro Pontifici Foundation. Good morning, everyone. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome. I thank the president and members of the foundation, and I greet all of you who are taking part in this annual international conference and General Assembly. The theme of this year's conference, Overcoming Polarizations and Rebuilding Global Governance. The Ethical Foundations speaks to us of the deepest purpose of the Church's social doctrine as a contribution to peace and dialogue in the service of building bridges of universal fraternity. So here's pretty common post-conciliar language that we see very often. Building bridges, universal fraternity, global governance. Right? These are things we tend to see highlighted by the post-conciliar popes. Especially in this Easter season, we realize that the risen Lord always goes before us, even at times when injustice and death seem to prevail. Let us help one another, as I said on the evening of my election, to build bridges through dialogue and encounter. So again, that good old post-conciliar language accompanying with the journeying wish with dialogue, encounter. We tend to hear these buzzwords pretty often, especially with a synodal model. He says to build bridges through dialogue and encounter, joining together as one people, always at peace. This is not something that happens by chance. It's rather an active and continuous interplay of grace and freedom, one that our meeting today seeks to respect and support. Pope Leo XIII, who lived in an age of momentous and disruptive change, sought to promote peace by encouraging social dialogue between capital and labor, technology and human intelligence, and different political cultures and nations. Pope Francis spoke of a polycrisis. So here we see him again quoting Pope Francis, right? If there's two things that you're going to see in every papal address from Pope Leo, it's a quote from Pope Francis and a quote from Vatican II. and he maintains that here, right? So Pope Francis spoke of a polycrisis in describing the dramatic nature of our own age, marked by wars, climate change, growing inequalities, forced and contested migration, stigmatized poverty, disruptive technological innovations, job security, and precarious labor rights. That's a reference to Pope Francis from March the 3rd. On such important issues, the Church's social doctrine is called to provide insights that facilitate dialogue between science and conscience, and thus make an essential contribution to better understanding hope and peace. This doctrine helps us to realize that more important than our problems or eventual solutions is the way we approach them. So more important than the solutions, more important than the goal is how we get to the goal, he's saying. Guided by criteria of discernment, sound ethical principles, and openness to God's grace, you have the opportunity to show that the Church's social doctrine, with its specific anthropological approach, seeks to encourage genuine engagement with social issues. It does not claim to possess a monopoly on truth. Now listen to that. You have the opportunity to show that the Church's social doctrine, with its special anthropological approach, seeks to encourage genuine engagement with social issues. It does not claim to possess a monopoly on the truth, full stop. Sounds like he's saying the church doesn't possess a monopoly on the truth, or at least that's how some are going to read them, right? But he continues, it does not possess or does not claim to possess a monopoly on truth, either in its analysis of problems or in its proposal of concrete solutions. So it really looks like contextually, he's saying the church doesn't necessarily have a monopoly on the truth and its solutions and its analysis on what's going on in society. I think that's going to be concerning for some people. They're going to say, wait, hold on. I thought the church does possess that, right? And then there might be some others who attempt to read him with some kind of hermeneutic of continuity and will attempt to say, well, maybe it's a both and, right? Where social questions are concerned, knowing how best to approach them is more important than providing immediate responses to why things happen or how to deal with them. So he's basically saying when it comes to issues in society, more important than the solution is how you deal with the problem. Again, I think there might be some people who are concerned about that. They'll say, no, wait, it's the solution that's most important. Here he seems to be, no, it's kind of the journey that you take and how you take that journey rather than the conclusion at which you arrive. So that's certainly going to raise some eyebrows for some people, right? The aim is to learn how to confront problems, for these are always different since every generation is new and faces new challenges, dreams, and questions. This is a fundamental aspect of our attempts to build a culture of encounter through dialogue and social friendship. So once again, an emphasis on dialogue, encounter, accompanying with, and less of an emphasis on truth, conclusions, right? Less of an emphasis on those, more of an emphasis on let's get together and just dialogue. That's kind of been the post-conciliar movement as a whole. Less emphasis on bringing someone to the truth and more emphasis on let's just have a conversation kind of thing. For many of our contemporaries, the words dialogue and doctrine can seem incompatible. Perhaps when we hear the word doctrine, we tend to think of a set of ideas belonging to a religion. That is, in all fairness, the general traditional definition, right? I suspect most people who are watching this video, that's the definition that they have for doctrine, teachings. The word itself makes us feel less disposed to reflect, call things into question, or seek new alternatives. So here he's talking about new alternatives in the context of doctrine and questioning things in the context of doctrine. Again, this might raise some eyebrows for some people, right? In the case of the church's social doctrine, we need to make clear that the word doctrine has another, more positive meaning, without which dialogue itself would be meaningless. Doctrine can be a synonym or science, discipline, and knowledge. Understood in this way, doctrine appears as the product of research, and hence of hypotheses, discussions, progress, and setbacks, all aimed at conveying a reliable, organized, and systematic body of knowledge about a given issue. So this also might be concerning for some people, because I think if you were to ask most people what is doctrine, they're going to say it's a teaching of the deposit of faith, that which was handed on by the apostles. And when it comes to discipline, well, what is a discipline? It's an application of that doctrine. It's an application of the doctrine of the deposit of faith, once and for all handed on to the saints. It's an application of that in today's society. I think that's how most people would define it. It seems like he might be taking a different definition here. I don't know if it's one incompatible with a more traditional understanding or if they're diametrically opposed. But he says, consequently, a doctrine is not the same as an opinion, but it's a rather a common, collective, and even multidisciplinary pursuit of truth. So that also is going to raise eyebrows, right? Multidisciplinary pursuit of truth for doctrine. Again, some people are going to say, I thought doctrine was that which was revealed once and for all to the saints. Those teachings that God revealed to Jesus and the apostles and so on, what you have there in the first century with what Jesus taught, that teaching that God the Father gave to God the Son, and God the Son became incarnate and revealed to the world and shared to the world and shared through the apostles, and the Holy Spirit guiding those apostles into all truth. I think that's what most people are going to define it as. Here he seems to be defining it as a multidisciplinary pursuit of the truth. Again, some may say, well, they're compatible. Others might say, I don't know. Well, he says indoctrination is immoral, full stop. He's saying if you're indoctrinating people, that's immoral. It kind of sounds like something Pope Francis would say in some ways. He says it stifles critical judgment and undermines the sacred freedom of respect for conscience, even if it's erroneous. So he's saying when you're indoctrinating people, that's not respecting their conscience, even if their conscience is in error. And so I don't know, I'm almost reminded of Pope Francis talking about not proselytizing people, that it's a sin to proselytize. I'm almost kind of getting those vibes here. Indoctrination, he says, is immoral because it doesn't allow them to engage in critical judgment. It undermines their freedom of conscience, even if they're in error. He says it resists new notions and rejects movement, change, or the evolution of ideas in the face of new problems. Now, that one's really going to raise some eyebrows. Wait, what? So he's saying the evolution of ideas is not a bad thing. He's saying evolution of ideas is a good thing, and indoctrination stifles that, gets in the way of evolution of ideas. Some might see that in contradistinction with development of doctrine, right? So, people who are looking for a more development of doctrine model as opposed to evolution and rupture, this is going to be interesting to them, because here he's using language that is often associated with progressives and is often associated with those who want to introduce doctrinal changes in the church. So whether that's what he means here or not might be debatable, right? But there's a little bit more in the context. Let's look at the next thing he says. He's talking about doctrine next. He says, as opposed to indoctrination, doctrine, on the other hand, as a serious, serene, and rigorous discourse, aims to teach us primarily how to approach problems, and even more importantly, how to approach people. So doctrine is less about a teaching and more about how to approach problems in his estimation, in what he's saying here. Again, that might be very different than what most people think of when they think of doctrine, a doctrine being teaching. It also helps us to make prudential judgments when confronted with challenges. Seriousness, rigor, and serenity are what we must learn from every doctrine, including the church's social doctrine. In the context of the ongoing digital revolution, we must rediscover, emphasize, and cultivate our duty to train others in critical thinking, countering temptations to the contrary, which can also be found in ecclesial circles. There is so little dialogue around us. Shouting often replaces it, not infrequently in the form of fake news and irrational arguments, proposed by a few loud voices. Well, we've talked a lot about that on this channel, so that will certainly ring true for many of the people in the audience, right? Deeper reflection and study are essential, as well as a commitment to encounter and listen to the poor, who are the treasure for the church and for humanity. Their viewpoints, though often disregarded, are vital if we are to see the world through God's eyes. Those born and raised far from the centers of power should not merely be taught the church's social doctrine. They should also be recognized as carrying it forward and putting it into practice. Individuals committed to the betterment of society, popular movements, and various Catholic workers groups are an expression of those existential peripheries where hope endures and springs anew. I urge you to let the voice of the poor be heard, dear friends, as Vatican II states. There it is. He's quoting Vatican II. As I said, two things he'll always quote: Pope Francis and Vatican II in every audience so far. Vatican II states, in every age, the church carries the responsibility of reading the signs of the times and interpreting them in the light of the gospel, if she is to carry out her task. In language intelligible to every generation, she should be able to answer the ever-recurring questions which people ask about the meaning of this present life and of the life to come, and how one is related to the other. I invite you then to participate actively and creatively in this discernment process, and thus contribute with all of God's people to the development of the church's social doctrine in this age of significant social changes, listening to everybody and engaging in dialogue with all. So here he's saying we need to listen to everyone, believer or not, saint or sinner. Listen to everyone, dialogue with everyone, because they all have something to contribute. That's the idea here, which is the synodal model, right? In our day, there is a widespread thirst for justice, a desire for authentic fatherhood and motherhood, a profound longing for spirituality, especially among young people and the marginalized, who do not always find effective means of making their needs known. There's a growing demand for the church's social doctrine to which we must need to respond. I don't know. I mean, it seems like all we've heard in the post-conciliar church is the social doctrine, right? There might be something to say about getting back to dogmatic theology, right? I feel like all we ever hear about is the social doctrine. Okay. He says, I thank all of you for your commitment and your prayers for my ministry. I cordially bless you and your families and all that you do. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, this one certainly is going to raise some eyebrows for anybody who's paying attention. You know, I don't know how many people are going to pay attention to these addresses of Pope Leo XIV, but if you're paying attention, there's a lot of stuff here. A curious way in which he's understanding doctrine, a curious way in which he speaks of the evolution of ideas, a very curious way in which he speaks of indoctrination. All very interesting concepts that, again, some people might be strongly in favor of, others might be strongly critical of, other people might just kind of be somewhere in the middle and they're like, I don't know if this makes a whole lot of sense, and they just kind of have a question mark and they say, I don't know, let's just see how this plays out in the future, kind of thing. Some are saying doctrine is open for review in the comment section. Well, you know, there's going to be different views there, right? I mean, one view is that the doctrine that's revealed, the deposit of faith, divine revelation, isn't open for review. Another view kind of sees doctrine as evolutionary and is subject to even fundamental changes. And then there's, you know, kind of a middle position that wants to say the substance of the doctrine remains the same. Maybe its application and articulation can be modified. What are we getting here? I think it almost sounds like a little bit more of a left-leaning progressive understanding of doctrine. Maybe not like full-blown all the way on the left, but it sounds a little bit more to the left than, and you know, something that you might hear from a traditionalist and a traditionalist and traditional understanding of doctrine. The way he's defining it here seems to be a little different, right? And there will be people who argue, well, they're all compatible, right? And they'll, as people do, Pope-splain, right? They'll try to harmonize these things. There will be others who say, no, there's no way to harmonize this. This is rupture, blah, 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 blah. Good to see Father Brown. He's in the chat. Pope Leo is on very solid ground here. Theologians and appliers of doctrine can sometimes be guilty of the same fundamental sin as the Tower of Babel, putting too much hope in the system alone. Thank you so much for that, Father Brown. I always appreciate your contribution, and great to see you in the chat. What else we got? Kilo says, I don't think the document is not theological doctrine, but social doctrine of the church. Yeah, I understand that. But is there really a fundamental difference, right? Certainly the church's social doctrine and application of that in society has to be consistent and compatible with the deposit of faith. It has to be an application of the deposit of faith to the current day and age and circumstances, right? So I don't know if there's like a huge rupture between them. They would need to be compatible, certainly, right? Okay, what else we have? Looking through the chat. Christ Bear says, Catholics are upset because it's going to take a few thousand years to convert the world, ? Welcome to Earth. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, Philip says, in the case of the church's social doctrine, we need to make clear that the word doctrine has another more positive meaning without which dialogue itself would be meaningless. Thank you for that, Philip. What else we have? Stephen asks, how are the Augustinian different than the Franciscan order? Yeah, different rules that they live by, right? Kilo says, I agree with your analysis, Michael. Thank you. I appreciate it. Andrew says, let us review just war doctrine. It's high time. I don't think you're going to get that anytime soon. If you were expecting that one, don't hold your breath. and actually, if you get it, you might not be happy with the answer that you're going to get, right? Again, in a day and age where the magisterium is saying death penalty inadmissible, even life sentences are a silent death penalty, and criticizing life sentences, I don't get the impression you're going to get a very positive analysis of just war theory, right? So you might not want to hold your breath on that one. Okay, what else we got? AJ, I love how you always show the continuity of the teachings in the magisterium and the beauty of Vatican II documents. Pope Leo XIV is doing very well. Thank you. And this one might be something that some are concerned about, because they might say, okay, how does this line up with the deposit of faith and the traditional understanding of doctrine and so on? So again, like I said, it might raise some eyebrows. Okay, Michael, why don't you pick a side and try to reconcile these addresses with the tradition? I mean, how many times have I done that and been ridiculed and mocked and slandered for doing that for years and years and years? Where you been? Where you been, David? Welcome to the party. I've been doing that for years, right? What else we got? Looking through here. Catholic Theology Answers says modernism is demonic. We need to go back to the Latin Mass. Okay, thank you. Kilo says Pope Leo XIV had an audience with Cardinal Pizzaballa. Have you heard anything about it? I think I heard that there was an audience, but I don't know what all was discussed. If you do, please let me know. Billy says, sorry to lay a question on you like that. Billy, okay, which one was your question? I forgot. Let's see. I don't see it. I don't recall. I apologize, Billy. Okay. Another commenter says, I think this speech was not well prepared for Pope Leo. I suppose it was prepared for Francis' meeting. They changed some things, but not enough. I don't know. I don't know if there was preparation for it or not. You know, it kind of gets into the concept now of Leo-splaining, right? Is it the case that it was prepared for Francis and they just didn't look at it enough, or are you actually getting a good feel for Pope Leo? I think this is a feel for Pope Leo. This doesn't look like something written for Pope Francis. This is very clearly written for someone after Pope Francis. So that's apparent in the document itself. So no, I doubt very seriously this was something prepared under the previous pontificate. It's also not very long, so it wouldn't be hard to rewrite the whole thing, right? But it depends on how you look at it, right? If you're going to try to just if you're going to go the extra mile, give as much of the benefit of the doubt, you might take that position, right? I do find it curious because that was ridiculed in the previous pontificate. Anytime somebody gave Pope Francis the benefit of the doubt, they were slandered, they were accused, they were everything. But now it seems like, okay, but on the other hand, that appears to be extended to Pope Leo, and I kind of wonder, why wasn't that extended to Pope Francis as well? Okay. Ruli says, the issue with the watering down of doctrine, then where does it stop? Who now sets the standard? For example, if we water down public revelation, then essentially it will be charged throughout time. That's where the deposit of faith comes into play to kind of ground and root everything. I didn't see any references to it. Now, I have seen references to him speak of the deposit of faith elsewhere, right? So we have seen that from him elsewhere. It would have maybe helped if he had kind of rooted and grounded some of the comments that he made here in the notion of the deposit of faith to kind of give a little bit more stability to what he's saying here. But then again, I don't write these audiences. I don't write these speeches. So it's definitely not how I would write things. Okay. Chris says, what does this mean for us on the moral theological side, if it does at all? I can think what it means is you're going to see a lot of continuity between this pontificate and the previous one on the question of morals. Okay. Looking through the chat. Did I cover the media message from the Pope? Yes, I did in a previous video. If you watch the video of the speech, you can notice that the Pope is not convinced about what he has to read. If that's the case, then why read it? Right? I mean, if I read to you something about atheism, promoting atheism, I'm not just going to sit there and keep reading it to you. I'm going to say, hey, I don't agree with this. Let me correct that. So I'm sorry. I don't know if I buy that one. Wise Line says Michael is in denial. I don't know about that. I think I got a pretty good grasp of the situation. Okay, Thesar says nothing can affect me more. I've developed an immunity to these synodal speeches. Well, again, there's some people who have kind of developed a fatigue from this kind of language, and this kind of an approach, and then others find it very, very beneficial, right? So there's two different styles, two different approaches. There's different people. Some love it, some hate it. Some are kind of somewhere in between. Um, More the same, right? Nothing really new. Viola says, people, Leo is not someone to say something he doesn't believe. I sure hope not, because if somebody is willing to sit there and read and teach a speech that they don't agree with and not immediately correct it, then there's a serious problem with that person. That's a person that can't be trusted. That's a person who's dishonest. So I don't believe that Pope Leo is doing that. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he's an honest person, and that he does believe what he's reading here. Okay. Okay, don't we just need a definition of dogma versus doctrine? I don't see conflict in what he said. Right, so some people won't see a conflict. Others will attempt to introduce some conflict, just as we've seen, in the last, I don't know, few decades or so. There's going to be different approaches. It just kind of boils down to a person's hermeneutics. So, Michael, when did you change your approach? What do you mean? What do you mean? Okay, Stephen, I still think he's going to have a bit more conservative mindset than the previous pope. Maybe that's possible. I think it might still remain to be seen how he'll fare with the previous pontificate on some matters. We're still pretty early on, so I don't know. You might be right. Kilo says, I don't see a conflict. Right. Those who are attempting to use a hermeneutic of continuity likely won't. Those who are using a hermeneutic of rupture and suspicion likely will. It kind of goes back to those methodologies that I've often pointed y'all to. Josh says, social doctrine is different than dogma. Not exactly. I don't think that's accurate. That's not accurate at all. In fact, I think that's incredibly problematic. But I think I understand what you're trying to say, though. I think what you're trying to say is the application of doctrine to society is different than the theoretical teachings. I don't think you can say they're substantially different, but I think what you're trying to say is the application of them is different than the teaching itself. So the teaching versus the application of the teaching. I think that's what you're trying to say. There's some truth to that, but the application has to be in harmony with the teaching, right? And there can't be just a substantial, or at least shouldn't be a substantial rupture, even though there currently are in the church's disciplines. There are some instances that are really at odds with the teaching itself. Perhaps the discipline of the administration of communion to people who are heretics, for instance. But usually they need to go hand in hand. I think that's what you're trying to say. Okay, what else we got? You used to be on the side of a hermeneutic of continuity, and now you seem like you're trying to remain neutral. That's funny. So if I'm just like out there giving you my opinion on how to harmonize this, I'm a Pope splainer and I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm talking about. And if I just don't offer my opinion and thoughts and I just give you multiple angles to look at it, I've changed my perspective. It's funny how people work, right? Stephen, I think Leo is going to choose his words very carefully. Once again, he has a mathematical mind. I think he'll probably be a little bit better than the previous pontificate. Although there were things in this speech that probably should have been rewritten. Evolution of ideas, indoctrination is immoral. Those are not things that I think are going to be overall beneficial. I think there's ways of saying those things without maybe alarming people in that kind of way. I think that was one of the downsides to Pope Francis as well. Sometimes he would have some comments that were there for kind of shock value, and I don't think that they were very effective in many cases. Kilo says, I'll take Pope Splainer or Leo Splainer as a badge of honor. There you go. Okay. What else we got? Why do we restrict TLM when Quo Primum says that the Tridentine rite of the Mass cannot be restricted? Okay. I have multiple videos specifically on that. The restriction is for anyone other than a pope. A pope can obviously undo what another pope does in matters of discipline. What when pope locks, another can unlock. What when unlocks, another can lock. So Quo Primum wasn't written to bind future popes. It was binding all other clergy, cardinals, bishops, priests. How do you know that? Because Pius V himself changed quo primum and altered the Mass after quo primum himself, the guy who wrote it. Also, other popes after him changed the Latin Mass after quo primum. The same language is used of the breviary, which substantially changed by multiple popes way before the preconciliar or postconciliar period. So I think that you have to have a better understanding of magisterial documents and a better historical awareness. So that's the quick answer. Let's see. One commenter says, raising eyebrows is a very human response. Indeed, it is. NT, it's very comforting to see Leo being media savvy. I haven't seen him engage the media yet. I really want to see that. I really want to see him for off-the-cuff statements, kind of see how he does with that. AJ, if you study Michael's videos, he has plenty of material. You'll see he has been consistent. I've been consistent all along. Still consistent. Whether people understand the consistency or not is not so much a reflection of me as it is on them at this point. Okay, what else we got? Okay, Steven, this is a fair and balanced channel. Way more balanced than you know who come on now. This is a great channel. Thanks, Mike. Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, I very much attempt to be balanced here. And I also want to try to explain to people why people believe what they believe and different ways in which different people look at things. It might not necessarily be how I look at it, but I want people to understand how different people look at things, why they come to different conclusions when they look at the same information. That's been fascinating to me, watching how people look at the same data, assuming we're talking about people who've looked at the same data. Some people are just not aware, right? But what's curious to me is I can watch people look at the same data and come to two very different conclusions. What that tells me is there's two different methodologies of interpretation and hermeneutics at play. That's what that tells me. So it's not the data, it's how they're interpreting data. And what I want to do with this audience moving forward is show you how different people will interpret things and come to different conclusions based on their methodology. So I'm going to have videos explaining to you, why do Protestants believe what they believe? Why do Eastern Orthodox believe what they believe? Yes, why do Catholics believe X, Y, and Z? Why do skeptics believe X, Y, and Z? And they tend to look at the same data but come to different conclusions. Why is that? Well, I want to educate people and make them aware of different hermeneutics, different methodologies that are at play. And at that point, you might not agree with the person, but you can at least kind of respect and understand at the very least where they're coming from. That way you can know it's just not coming out of left field. Here's why they come to the conclusion that they come to. Why do liberal Catholics believe that the church's teachings on morality can change? You might not agree with their reasons for why they believe it, but it's a good question. Why do they believe that? Like, how can you be a Catholic and believe this? Like, where are they coming from? I've been fascinated in seeing how they attempt to justify it all. Now, whether I personally think it's coherent and consistent is a different question, but I at least know the answer why they believe that. I at least know why Father James Martin believes what he believes. I do know why. I may not agree, but I know why. And I think people need to be aware of that. Father Brown, your first few minutes of that video explaining the hermeneutic of continuity was gold. It really boils down to those kinds of questions. Yeah. If you use a hermeneutic of continuity, giving the benefit of the doubt, you're going to look for ways to harmonize things that appear to be contradictory statements. You'll do that with the Bible. You'll do that with the magisterium. You'll do that with friends and family members. Your spouse, your parents, your coworkers. Sounds like you're contradicting yourself from what you said yesterday. Well, depends on your methodology. Are you attempting to harmonize them, give them the benefit of the doubt? Or are you using a hermeneutic of rupture and suspicion? I'm looking for something to be contradictory, or I'm not looking for ways to harmonize it, or I'm looking for contradictions and rupture. Depending on your methodology will determine how you come to a certain conclusion, right? Now, we know what Pope Benedict the 16th said and what kind of hermeneutic needs to be used. a hermeneutic of continuity. We know what the Bible says. You have to give the judgment of charity. So we know which methodology is the correct one versus a defective one. But we need to be aware that that's operative in really all aspects and facets of life. David says, but there's a Catholic position. It's just not up for grabs. All right. Yeah. Um, if you believe in the immutability of church dogma, the deposit of faith, yeah. Now, if you're one of those Catholics who thinks that doctrine and dogma can evolve, you're going to conclude differently. And that's why some people are going to raise eyebrows whenever Pope Leo speaks of the evolution of ideas. They're going to say, wait, hold on, that's progressive language, right? Now, whether or not that's where he's coming from, different question, but those things are there. And for people who are paying attention, that's going to jump out at them. Wise says, I see nothing wrong with what Pope Leo said, right? Depends on your methodology, your hermeneutic, and your background, your level of awareness and information. You know, there'll be different conclusions. Okay. Viola says, right, because there are sometimes so much more complicated than they seem. The benefit of the doubt is nice. Well, I'll put it to you this way. You would want people to give you the benefit of the doubt, right? So you need to, as a rule, extend that to somebody else. Unless it becomes clear that that person is not of goodwill and is being deceptive, then you can no longer afford to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. But until that's like morally certain, the best rule of thumb is to give the benefit of the doubt, that hermeneutic of continuity, because that's what you would want as well. And as somebody whose words have been twisted endlessly by people with a hermeneutic of suspicion, I know what it's like. I know what it's like for people to slander me, make up things about me. I saw a guy, an Eastern Orthodox, in a debate do the same thing to me. It's really sad. It's a case where a guy who, when I was looking into Eastern Orthodoxy, I used to really look up to him. And after a while, I kind of surpassed him in knowledge of Eastern Orthodoxy, and so I stopped looking to him. And I think that really hurt his feelings, and it looks like he's kept a grudge for years. And so I just saw him today in the debate, straw man me and attack me and stuff like that. And it's kind of sad to see that. I don't know what it is about me, but I have an ability, evidently unintentionally, to get into the mind of somebody and make them hold a grudge for a long time. I don't know what it is. It's definitely unintentional, but it's like an ex, a toxic ex that you just can't get away with. I don't know what I'm doing to these people, but I see that, right? And I see people straw man me, and it's because they're not attempting to use a serious hermeneutic of judgment and charity and continuity. They're operating with that bad will. They're operating with that methodology. And of course, they wouldn't want people to do that to them, but they then do that to others. So I've seen what that looks like. And so you kind of have to ask, what would I want in return, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, I think is the way you need to look at it. They say Michael often is a problem. That's what they say. Jimmy says, really sad. It's also hilarious. It's your superpower. It's unintentional. I don't know why they obsess over me like this, but I have to ask at some point, is it something I'm doing? Why do they obsess over me like this? For years? It seems that I some of these media personalities have obsessed over me for years, and I'm wondering what's going on there. What did I do? Okay, good question, David. At what point do we recognize there are people in the church who want to change the immutable moral law? Well, when it becomes just apparent that they're pushing for a substantially different understanding of doctrine than before. At that point, I think it's pretty safe to say that this is willful and intentional, right? So it's maybe not something that's off the cuff, but some kind of habitual pattern that you're seeing. At that point, I think you can know they're attempting to modify things because they don't believe that certain things are immutable in nature. Okay. Viola, holding grudges because of jealousy is very unhealthy and sad. Yeah, it really hurts the person more than the person that they're jealous of. It hurts. It hurts themselves, right? Um, it's a really bad place to be spiritually and emotionally. Great wall. People don't like when you hold a mirror up to their bad behavior and they have to be confronted with it. Yeah, yeah, people don't like that. Okay. Billy says, Michael, maybe you have a demon on you. Is that because of my tattoos? Something that just irrationally irks someone. Is that a thing? Um, I wouldn't fault the demons. I would fault the person. I think you're excusing the person of their own responsibility. Um, how is this incompatible with development of doctrine? That's going to be the question, right? That's going to be the thing. Um, AJ says seeking to destroy someone's character is murder. Right. The notion of slander and false accusations, according to even the New Testament of Paul, is something that sends a person to hell for eternity. It's listed right next to same sex acts. It's listed as something that will damn a person for eternity. So yeah, it's a very serious thing. Gossip, slander, bearing false witness, they're all listed next to all of those other sins of the flesh, right? All right. Okay, David says, Michael, I agree with your statements, but it gets tiring trying to reconciling these statements with tradition. Then don't look into church history. That's my advice to you. Don't open up a history book and read the ecumenical councils. Don't look into 2,000 years of magisterial interventions. It's not for the faint of heart. If you're going to harmonize things and use a methodology of continuity, your work is cut out for you, as is the case if you maintain that the Bible is inerrant, right? There's a lot of material to harmonize at that point. Um, so, you know, but just because a task is difficult doesn't mean it's wrong, right? Some things are difficult, but that doesn't mean it's wrong or that you shouldn't even do it. Some things need to be done, even if they're very difficult. Um, but not all things have to be done by every person. I don't expect everyone to climb Mount Everest or something, right? Maybe some people need to do that, but not everybody has to do that. I don't expect everybody to be an expert theologian and harmonize everything for the magisterium, but maybe some people need to do that, right? Um, Christ bearer, just be obedient, then you're good. In the vast majority of cases, that would seem to be the way to go because how many people have the time to go and figure it all out? How many people have that? I mean, most people they got a job, they got a family, they got a thousand other things that they have to do. Now they got to go and harmonize everything from councils and popes and come on, that's just even theologians who do that as their profession have a difficult time doing that. And so the average person, that's just not their task, right? Okay. David, I'm just saying these statements from the Vatican could be clear and more in continuity. Amen. I've said that for years. Yeah, I won't disagree with you there. I will never disagree with you on that. I think that's been my main constructive criticism of pretty much everything that the magisterium puts out, and that is things could be more clear. And this is a criticism that goes back to even the Council of Nicaea 1. There wasn't enough clarity on the deity of the Holy Spirit there, and that led to some problems. There was a lack of clarity even on um, Christology in relation to Jesus there. So that's why you had future ecumenical councils that had to further clarify things. I think that, yeah, things could be done better. Sometimes things are done this way to satisfy different groups in the church, for better or worse. In the case of Nicaea, the reason why they did not weigh in on the question of the divinity of the Holy Spirit is because they knew some of the fathers rejected it, others would have accepted it. So they were basically like, we're going to table that issue and we're just going to focus on Christology. You might say that's a good thing. You might say that's a bad thing. Many councils did that. Trent did that. A lot of the ecumenical councils did that. You might say that wasn't a good idea. Maybe. Vatican II had a lot of things that it kind of tabled and was very middle of the road on, and maybe should have been more clear on. A lot of the post-conciliar documents, I can say the same thing about them. It's a fair criticism that I think you can offer in a constructive way. Okay. One commenter says this address is very good and precise. Pope Leo XIV is great writing and communication style. Thank you for the comment. All right, so I think that's going to do it for today. Everybody hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Let me know your thoughts about this. Would love to hear from y'all. Shell is coming in at the last moment saying, I'm here. What are we talking about? You missed the whole show, Shell. You missed the whole thing. Hit that rewind button. Good to see you, though. Everybody, again, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. Check me out at Patreon if you want to get access to extra material and support the channel. Patreon.com/Reason and Theology. Patrons, I'll see y'all either later on today or tomorrow. All right, that's going to do it.